the great thing about this process that Marquis and other bioethanol plants are doing is we're letting nature do the capture. So it's not like you need a huge piece of equipment to suck air, but we have plants that's capturing CO2, and then we sequester that, and the volumes are huge because we have a large plant in the U.S. It's 1.2 million tons a year, which would make a huge impact on the environment.
Welcome to Carbon Conversations, a podcast by Biochar Life, where we explore the cutting edge of environmental solutions, from biochar to smart agriculture to the climate tech revolution. We sit down with experts and business leaders at the forefront of change. This is your host, Matt Rickard. Hey Dora, how you doing? Good morning.
Good morning, Matt. Hi.
Nice to see it. I have to say, actually, nice to have a podcast in my time zone, because I'm often on at like 6 a.m. or 9 p.m. doing so many podcasts with the US. So you're in Singapore, of course. And maybe a good start is just I'll let you give a quick introduction and your background, the work you do, and a bit on Marquis in terms of... And actually maybe a little bit on biofuels, what it is, I think probably just as a setup for our audience and for the conversation.
Sure. Thanks for having me here, Matt. And you're right, we're sort of neighbors. I'm so tired of those evening calls myself as well. So this is nice to chat during our work day. So quick background. Let's start with, like you said, what is biofuels? Biofuels can mean multiple things. What we specialize in at Marquis is bioethanol. Bioethanol is actually produced from starch, and it's fermented, and then you get a bioethanol, which is alcohol. It's just like how you produce vodka, really, and it looks like vodka as well, the finished product. But then, in terms of biofuels, you've got used cooking oil has become quite popular, and you've got biodiesel. You've got a whole selection under biofuels, but what we specialize in the bioethanol. And then, so quickly, let me give you a background what Marquis does. I know I'm here in Singapore, but Marquis is actually a privately owned company. They operate and own the largest dry mill bioethanol plant in the world. They're located in Hennepin, Illinois. It's just a couple hours outside Chicago. And what they produce is bioethanol, but they also produce DDGs, which is distillers' dried grains with solubles. And then also you get a bit of corn oil. And then, of course, as a byproduct, you get carbon dioxide as well. We produce about 400 million gallons, which is about 1.5 billion liters of bioethanol annually.
Yep.
And then that's with about 700,000 tons of animal feed. And then let me pivot to the Singapore side, what we do here. We are actually a trading company. From Singapore, we actually manage all the logistics and distribution of the bioethanol and DDGs out of the US into the global market. And we are ISCC EU certified. That means our product is certified to be sustainable. And then my specific role is to open the market while figuring out this dynamic field of sustainability, all these changing policies out here. And I think, bioethanol is really in a unique position because we're in the cross sections of, we got agriculture, and we're also part of the energy transition because it's low carbon intense fuel. And then it's also sustainable. So it's in a really interesting sector that we operate in.
Sure, thanks. And there's some stuff I definitely want to dig into there. Maybe just before, I suppose, an overarching question. In terms of your role, are you involved in implementing sustainability strategies, practices around, biofuels, or are you more on the policy side in terms of trading and or a bit of both?
It's a bit of both. We operate really lean. Our office here, there's only 6 people here, and we actually have one more person in Spain. So again, very lean, but we work really closely with our US team.
Yep.
Because sustainability, being able to reduce the carbon intensity score of our product has to be done on the production side.
On the US side, right?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, and there's some questions I want to ask about that. Maybe before I do, I mean, what are some of the kind of biggest challenges that you face in terms of implementing sustainability practices in, bioproducts and biofuels, which may lead to some of the stuff I want to ask about? But yeah, maybe talk to us about some of the biggest challenges you face in terms of the sector.
I actually started this role, I think, quite naive, thinking it's a sustainable product that everybody wants. But no, we face huge challenges. First of all, there's a huge misconception. I think there's a pessimism in regards to corn-based bioethanol. Um, I mean, you see it now even with other biofuels like used cooking oil, greenwashing.
Yeah.
Any company that's trying to play in the energy transition, I think you get a lot of naysayers as well.
Yeah.
Uh, so just the overall misconception is a challenge, and then the lack of policy. And I think this goes for anybody. Again,
It's the
that's
whole
trying
industry,
to
really. But
energy
yeah.
transition, right? Lack of standards, policy. We work a lot with life cycle analysis. So at Marquis, we believe in science. We want to see that we're doing better in terms of sustainability, in terms of numbers. And when you say life cycle analysis, people just take that number for granted, not
Yeah.
understanding that there's so many different types of standards out there, so many different types of models. So every single time we sell our product to a different market, we have to be able to understand what sort of life cycle analysis they utilize. So like ICCEU, we've got the
Yeah.
GREAT model in the US. The EU also uses the Renewable Energy Directive, the RED, and then they keep tweaking it. We're about to have RED 3 to be utilized as a standard. And then the big next outlet is going to be SAF, Sustainable Aviation Fuel.
Yeah. Right.
And so ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, they have their own way of looking at life cycle analysis. So, if you have a sustainable product and you're just trying to sell it into different markets, how are you supposed to navigate through all these different standards? It is very, very difficult. In the US, kind of going back to misconceptions, I think land use, people ask me a lot about land use. In the US, the farm acreage that we use has not increased in the last 100 years. And I think being here in Asia, it's difficult to imagine the land mass that we have, especially here in Singapore, where you from coast to coast is like 30 miles.
Yeah. Right.
Whereas like the average farmland in the US is about 460 acres, and I think that's about 180, 190 hectares. We compare that to Thailand is
Yeah.
I think about 4 hectares for farmland, right?
Yeah. Even
Which
less
is
for a
about
smallholder
10
farmer. But
acres.
yeah. It's not a lot for sure.
Right, right. So the way that we do things in the US is if you when you have that vast volume, and then also you have like seed technology, a lot of the agriculture technology that's been increasing over the years. You just see these huge yield increases.
Yeah.
And then when you have those huge yield increases, you really reduce the carbon intensity because that means you use less fertilizers, less chemicals. Yeah, so since the 1920s, the US have seen yields go up 7 times.
Yep.
Now we're averaging about 177 bushels per acre in terms of corn,
Right.
which
Okay.
is more than anywhere else in the world.
And what are some of the areas you're focusing on in terms of, I suppose, what you would call your solutions? I mean, you've got a product, but there's a whole kind of supply, that there's a life cycle element to that. But where are the areas that you focus? Is it all the way along from the agricultural piece right at the beginning through to the refining part at the end? And I'm speaking as someone who does not understand exactly the biofuel space. But where are you looking at all those areas, consistently trying to be clever about how you do things, look at how you can reduce the impact? Is that kind of what you're doing in terms of your role and negating impact?
Yes, absolutely. Because when we, like I mentioned, we're ICC EU certified, they actually sent auditors all the way down to the farm. So they go and interview our farmers. They look at how much fuel they're using in their farm equipment, and that's all calculated into that life cycle analysis. So when you say life cycle analysis, I think it depends on where you draw the boundaries as
Yeah.
well, right? So for corn-based bioethanol, that's from when the seed's being planted to the emission, the outlet to scope 3 as well. So when we, what is it? In the farm, when the auditors come, they look at all the books the farmers keep in terms of the fertilizers they put on the ground. And what we're seeing, like this evolution happening, is you see a lot of precision farming going on. They have people think farming is like with a backhoe. It's not like that in the U.S. with these vast, huge acres. They
Yeah.
have these technical equipment that's got GPS on it. They've got precision farming going, which means you're only focusing on that specific area and you're only putting fertilizer on that specific area that needs it. And then they get a readout map of what areas did well, what areas not so good. And so it's become, I think farming has become quite technical, especially in the last several years.
Yeah, for sure, particularly in the West, and I think it's creeping through now in these parts of the world as well, which is great because that layer of excuse me technology that can be used can allow us to make big strides. Something that really has stuck in my mind when we first chatted. So we had a call about something different, not a podcast, but our kind of pre-call talking about other stuff. We were talking about, I think I connected with you because you went to an event in Malaysia, and obviously we're in the space of carbon removal, and we're seeing a lot of activity in carbon removal, particularly around biochar, and we're seeing a lot of investment, and a lot of that investment's going into high-tech equipment that isn't necessarily having an impact yet, but hopefully will later. You made some comments just around the impact you can have as an organization in terms of just at the kind of operational level of changing how you do things. And I won't quote the numbers unless you'd like to, but you talked about it in relation to some of the numbers we look at in terms of what direct air capture is going to do. But it'd be great if you could share some of that, because I think it was quite startling to me just looking at these other areas of, I'm not sure whether it would be carbon capture or carbon removal. I assume it's probably capture is how it's defined, but it was at the kind of operational level of what you do, making changes and just what impact that can have across the supply chain and basically for all of us because of those changes within your equipment and stuff.
Yeah. So one of the big goals that Marquis has is to reduce the carbon intensity of the end product, so the users can use a sustainable product. And the big project that we have going on right now is called BECS. It doesn't sound very sexy, but it's the bioenergy carbon capture and storage. And what we're doing is when we ferment the corn, the starch essentially, the starch gets fermented. It is like a beer product. You get all
Yeah.
these little bubbles, and that's the carbon dioxide, that's CO2. And we actually capture that CO2, and just out of pure luck, Marquis, our production facility, is actually sitting on top of great geology, and we're going to sequester that carbon dioxide just underneath the facility. So you have this cycle where the plants capture the CO2, and then that CO2 gets released during fermentation. We capture it and we store it underground,
Yep.
and it's permanent because you're talking about it's about 1,000 to 1,500 meters underneath, and then it's sealed by a cap rock, so it's not coming out it's not coming out, and we get to capture 1.2 million tons of carbon dioxide a year just by doing
Wow.
that.
Big
And
numbers.
correct. And then now you're right. When we were at H0, there was a direct air capture project that I was listening in about, and I think they are capturing about 10,000 tons a year. The great thing about this process that Marquis and other bioethanol plants are doing is we're letting nature do the capture. So it's not like you need a huge piece of equipment to suck air, but we have plants that's capturing CO2, and then we sequester that, and the volumes are huge because we have a large plant in the U.S. It's 1.2 million tons a year, which will make a huge impact on the environment.
Yeah, awesome. I think it's just so important. There's more focus on the nature element of what can be done today. I mean, that's why I remembered that. Just those numbers are obviously staggering, and it's not something you've got to scale up to. Once you do that, that is what you're going to capture essentially, right? Because it's part of your
Right.
existing process.
Yep. One of the big issues that we're having with the project, though, is the permitting. The permitting is quite strict in the U.S. Not only that, but I don't know why, but the Class 6 wells are having difficulty being permitted through the EPA in the U.S., which is the Environmental Protective Agency. Our permit's been in for like 2 years. So if somebody in the EPA is listening to this podcast, please approve the Marquis. It's better for the environment, I promise.
Cool. I'll put that in the notes. You never know. Maybe we can get the message out there. So the policy side it sounds like you, I mean, I get involved in policy a little bit with what we do, but it sounds like, I mean, you're involved in policy across multi-region, right? Which is where, I don't know, in your sector, do you find there's a lack of consistency, or because there's so much happening separately to achieve the same goal ultimately, but in siloed situations around the world? I mean, there's an overlap in what we do, but you're in slightly different areas. Do you see that as, what are some of the major challenges? Is that a challenge, in terms of the policy and regulation of the sectors?
Absolutely. It's crazy. Just like you said, Matt, we have a U.S. team that deals with the U.S. regulations, so I don't touch on that much. At the same time, that impacts what the end product, and then the policies in the region. Each country's got a different policy. I mean, it's not just policy. The countries are coming out with their targets, right? Their sustainability targets, and they all got different years, and they've all got different numbers. They calculate a different way,
Yeah.
and then now they're coming out with carbon schemes, and each country's got a completely different carbon scheme, and you know that the pricing for carbon is completely inconsistent as well.
Yeah.
And if you're in a country that's going to be penalized, or you're going to be taxed for carbon beyond a certain level, if you have a cap, then your carbon pricing is going to be more than somewhere that doesn't have that. So it's interesting with our low carbon intense product, we're seeing markets that will value that low carbon intensity more than other areas.
Yep.
And EU is probably the highest paying market for carbon right now. And then I think Asia is tagging along.
Right. Okay. Interesting. I wanted to ask you about oil and gas. We talked a little bit again on our last call, and you obviously had, a pretty lengthy career, 13 years or so with ExxonMobil before, coming into the role you're in now, and the oil and gas sector has a massive part to play in the whole environmental efforts. It also gets a really bad rap. However, we can't get away from oil and gas, particularly, I think. I'm living in a developing country, essentially. I mean, I'm often in rural areas. You just see there's an inevitability to needing, fossil fuels in certain regions. I feel there needs to be a balanced view. So I suppose my question with all that is, with your background and knowledge coming out of Exxon and understanding that sector, what do you see the role of oil and gas in this sector? Is it about completely wrapping up shop and changing course? Is it about them implementing balanced programs? Yeah, what from your view is the role of oil and gas in our sector in terms of ultimately reversing climate change, I suppose, is the big question. So
yeah, I don't like to point the finger just at oil and gas companies, because ultimately it's everybody.
yeah.
We as human beings, were like parasites to the earth, and we are just sucking the resources out of it, right? That's the honest truth. And what the oil and gas has provided is a mature sector. They are extremely efficient at doing projects and being able to run logistics, and the system's just built because for the last century, this has been the product that we build everything off of. I mean, if you look around your room, can you spot
Yeah.
Everything is oil and gas in it, right? So it is going to be complicated and difficult to move away from it. At the same time, we need to reduce our usage. We need to reduce the amount of fossil fuels that we're taking out of the earth, right? I think it's that's clear. So how do we do that? Oh man, this is why I told my kids to study hard so they can figure out the world's energy issue. But people don't have that. I think that understanding that everything we touch has oil and gas in it.
Yeah.
And you can't tell just one company, okay, well, we're going to limit your use, your production, because then another company is just going to fill that void. Ultimately, I think oil and gas companies have to come on the ride. There has to be some sort of incentive. And oil and gas companies, they understand profitability really well. They're not going to do a project unless they see it profitable. So there needs to be profitability in terms of utilizing green products. I think a good industry that I like to point to is the safety industry.
Yep.
Safety wasn't a big deal, like, I mean, even 50, 60 years ago. You have the death rate on a project was tons higher. I think took a tour of like the Hoover Dam. And the number of people that died just building that dam is
Yeah, right.
just nowadays it's just unimaginable. But then safety became now it's part of profitability as well. Somebody did a study and realized that safer projects actually do well. They meet their targets, and it actually ends up being more profitable. So I think that mentality needs to be set in place. If you make something green, it's going to be more marketable, or maybe there has to be some sort of carrot, not just a stick, in order
Yep.
to be more green. And I think there needs to be a push for a carrot and a stick in terms of policy making, to give oil and gas companies that pivot to look at more green technologies.
It's very
There's so
interesting.
much to say. Yeah.
It's interesting you say that, because I had someone on the podcast a month or so ago, and all we talked about policy. All we talked about was policy, because that's his background. And actually, the podcast name became something like Carrot and Stick, because that's what he talked about predominantly through that podcast. So I think it's obviously a key point. And to your point on health and safety, actually, that's an interesting reference. I mean, I happen to know a little bit, because I ran a project a couple of years ago in Singapore in the marine industry. So I got to kind of know a little bit about that industry, and I was doing some consulting work that looked back over the last 15 years, and I'd seen the impact of health and safety over that 15-year period. But what was happening in the last 3, 4, 5 years is the impact around decarbonisation and alternative energy. So I just wonder if in 10 years, I assume oil and gas shipping, there's many parallels and similarities. We'll see, just a huge adoption of this new way of doing things, and the industry won't go away. It will just morph completely and be, these things will lead how it operates, rather than being things it's just got, in the background that's talking about. So,
I mean, the oil and gas industry is incredible because of the maturity, the number of professionals, and the resources they can pool on is so much greater than I think
yeah,
any green energy, any startup company. So they
definitely,
need to
yeah.
utilize what they have, those resources, and go towards something green. And again, all the big majors have their green entities now, right? ExxonMobil has their group. What is it called? Low Carbon Solutions Group now, and they're now looking into battery production. They're looking into CCS, but again, it's everything that complements their current business. I would love to see a bigger push, a quicker push, but gosh, I don't know how you do that.
Yeah. Well, Shell as well, they have their nature-based solutions group, which is not just a little group, it's huge, actually. We've had some inquiries from them and spoken to them and then just realized how vast that team is. But yeah, I think there needs to be an acceleration is probably the point, and, more of an effort, really, a faster effort. So,
Yeah. Yeah,
uh,
completely agree. More of an acceleration.
back to byproducts, and as we kind of start to draw to a close, what are the key trends you see shaping the future in terms of sustainability in bioproducts? What beyond what we've talked about you doing now, what's the kind of 5-10 year vision and journey, and what you're seeing come down the track?
So right now you see bioethanol being used for road transport. We didn't even get to that because there's so many things to talk about with this topic. So bioethanol, you can blend it into your gasoline. It's a natural octane. So and it burns clean. So you don't get all the chemical releases, the noxes into the air. So it not only creates better breathing air, but it's also got low carbon intensity compared to regular traditional gasoline.
Yep.
And where was it going? In the future, we're going to see less and less ICE vehicles, right? Or there you see a movement towards EVs. What we believe in is I've seen a presentation by Toyota on hybrids. Now
Yep.
Toyota's got a very very interesting philosophy. They believe in the blend. They're not going to push EVs down everybody's throat because they don't think that's a solution for every single location. And I completely agree. Like, especially in Southeast Asia, when you have, you know, people selling gasoline in plastic liter bottles on the side of the road,
Yep.
it's going to be difficult to change out the entire infrastructure. And then talk about time and the money it's going to cost. Like, I think it's more feasible to have a replacement that is a low carbon fuel, which you can use bioethanol for. So I
Yep.
think we're going to see gasoline trending downwards. At the same time, I think you're going to see probably more demand in places that can't swap to EVs using bioethanol.
Yep.
And then maybe 10 years, a lot of countries have a target for using sustainable aviation fuel by 2030. I think, and then you see a lot of projects that are currently doing feasibility studies.
Yep.
So we're going to see more and more sustainable aviation fuel plants coming up, I think, in the next several years. And alcohol to jet is going to be the next big thing. Now, ethanol alone can't meet the demand of all of SAF that's going to be needed, but you've already got the HEFA pathway, which is using the fats. And then I think you are going to see diversification utilizing bioethanol into the alcohol to jet pathway.
Yep.
And so
I,
that's a bit of the long-term outlets.
I want to. You're right. At the beginning of this, you said, "Oh, there's so much more," and I want to unpack a bit of this because I got some questions on it. But we could, and look, I'm okay for a bit longer. I know we started late, but that's fine. We can go on a bit. But I'm just interested, I think, in terms of the vehicle side here. So, when you look at, well, two questions: what is the current availability? But then also, what are the? I don't know a lot about kind of biofuels. What are the alterations needed at a equipment level? So with aviation, for example, does it mean redesigning engines, or is it a fuel replacement? So what are the and I don't know if I'm stepping out of your area. I assume it's some stuff you know about. But in terms of the vehicle side, what are the the drawbacks and the challenges in terms of needing the right types of vehicles to run the fuel?
Yeah, let me go to do the vehicle side first.
Cool.
In terms of vehicle, believe it or not, you probably already have 10% ethanol in your vehicle. Many countries already have some sort of a ethanol blend already. And the reason why is, like I said, it's an octane booster. And on top of that, it's affordable. Many times it dips lower, the price dips lower than gasoline. So if you blend it in, I mean, blenders love this because they can just put more ethanol in it. They're allowed to, and then they get a cheaper product.
Yeah.
So cars need no modification. You can even do E20 no modifications. Uh, and but then Brazil is a very very interesting market. They use a lot of ethanol for vehicles, and they have a lot of E85 vehicles,
Yep.
which is a different. I think it's the timing. Something in the engine needs to be modified to run it on an E85. So if you're going to go majority ethanol, then you're going to have to make some modifications. But then I met this very, very interesting team once. They're out of Scandinavia, and they sell this kit. It's like a flex fuel kit where if you want to run your car in gasoline, you can just run it in gasoline, and then you put this little adapter on,
Yep.
and you can switch to ethanol. Like, let's say gasoline prices peak and the ethanol prices are cheaper, then you can run your vehicle with ethanol. It just changes the timing, because a lot of the vehicles are now, it's all electronics. So
Yep.
you can change the timing based on electronics. So it's just this little, it
Very
looks like a
cool.
little black box that you plug into, and you can change the timing of your vehicle, and then you can run it in ethanol.
Very cool.
Yeah,
Sounds like a funky MIT project. So,
and all these. I'm not anti-EVs, but then I do wonder, like, if there's the zombie apocalypse, like, what do? If there's no electricity, you're gonna have to find fuel somehow.
well, EVs here in Thailand, it's very interesting. It just seems in the last 6 months, EVs have really started to make traction. You're seeing the charging stations, like I'm in Chiang Mai in the north. And just by the way, to your point, E20, I'm not an expert on any of this stuff, but E20, I see these available in the fuel station. It's not stuff I can put in my rather guzzling diesel truck, unfortunately, that I have. But I have an off-road property, so that just to quickly check myself on the podcast. So yeah, for anyone listening, we have challenges with off-road, and this is part of the challenge. There's no vehicle I can have other than an off-road truck to get there. Anyway. My point was, I'm seeing EVs really kind of, make a lot of traction here in Thailand. But I agree with you. I think, no one solution is the right solution. We need a blend of different solutions because, frankly, if you go into rural areas here, there's not going to be any way to charge your EV. And there's also not going to be people that can afford them either. So that's the other thing. You've got to cater to every level of the socio-economic kind of ladder, and make sure everyone's catered for, I think. So...
Well, exactly. And Toyota did an interesting study down in Brazil, actually. They did a comparison between EVs and then with hybrids, but hybrids utilizing bioethanol. And they said if you look at the life cycle, the hybrids are actually better but it's very location specific. This was for Brazil because of the battery resources.
Yeah.
The battery that has to go in an EV is huge compared to creating a hybrid.
Yeah,
and apparently that one battery is the equivalent to, like, 53 hybrid batteries. So think about that. I thought that was a very, very interesting study, that depending on your energy, what the energy your grid is based off of, right?
Yeah, I won't say who they are, but I spoke to one of the major car companies recently that is having to invest in removal to balance out their own footprint because the EV production of an EV vehicle anyway is around, in their case, is around 30% more impactful than a traditional vehicle. So already, now of course the long-term impact is a lot less once it's on road, but just the production of the battery is a big part of that. So there are challenges here and stuff. So, something else that came to mind as you're speaking, one thing, and I don't know if it's just my lack of awareness. There's a huge amount of awareness in the world around EVs. You ask anyone, a good test for me is if I'm having a beer with one of my friends who's a builder who knows nothing about the work I'm doing, and he'll know about electric vehicles, and he might know about biofuels, but it doesn't seem like there's the same level of consumer awareness in terms of the work you're doing versus EVs. Is that a true statement? Am I wrong and just not looking in the right places? Or,
No, you're absolutely true. It's because there is Elon Musk didn't create bioethanol.
Okay. I was gonna say, is it because of that? But yeah, it does kind of make sense.
Yeah, I mean, our feedstock comes from farming, and I'm sorry if you're a farmer listening to this, but farmers don't tend to be posting tons of stuff on social media and isn't like taking the spotlight. So it's not a sexy product.
Fair enough. It makes sense. Yeah, it does help if you've got Elon Musk behind your product. It does tend
You
to.
do, you do.
The guy who owns X. It does help. So cool. Look,
And then,
go on.
oh,
Carry on,
sorry,
sorry.
and we keep saying, listening to Toyota, they talk about the hybrid, and it's a great solution. But if you want to show off, you're not going to go out to buy a Prius. That's the problem. Like a Tesla looks so much nicer than the
Yeah,
Prius.
indeed. I mean, I had another podcast again talking a lot about EV vehicles, and what I learned on that is there's some much better versions if you're really thinking environmentally, and a lot of the Chinese models cars, that cost a lot less to manufacture, that are far less
Yeah.
impactful to manufacture. But again, a lot of this is about how you look as much as how much you're reducing the footprint. So you've got to kind of get both things in the same package. So yeah,
We need like a Ferrari to go hybrid or something.
there you go.
There you go.
Cool. Hey, look, before we draw, before we draw to a close, what advice would you give to other sustainability leaders? People doing the same thing as you, trying to make an impact in their organizations, whether it's bigger organizations, whether it's startups. You're in this space. It's what you think about every day. Maybe you have a word of advice for other leaders in the sector trying to make a difference.
Oh goodness, I don't know if I'm even in the position for advice, because I think the issue is so overwhelming. At the same time, the continuous learning. Don't take the first article you read as fact. When I joined Marquis, I didn't know about bioethanol, and I realized a lot of the things that you Google aren't the actual science behind it. So really question what you read, and then do your research.
Cool. And something else you said earlier, I'll just add to it. You also said, make sure your kids, if you do, I don't have kids, but you kind of said, make sure your kids are going to get on with the work as well. I paraphrase what you said, but yeah, it seemed like a good piece of advice as well.
Yeah, they're the next generation, and it was so amazing to watch. When I took the kids down to the beach, they realized that there was just a lot of trash around. And it's not just me. I'm not, I'm definitely, I've got like terrible parenting skills, but even from the school, they're teaching sustainability. So at the beach, they realized there was tons of trash. They just started picking it up on their own. They were so proud, made
Cool.
these huge piles. And I think investing in that next generation as well. If you are a leader in sustainability, please pass it on to the next generation.
Yeah, for sure. I think so. Look, Dora, I didn't have any more questions, and I really appreciate you joining. Before we close off, do you want to just share any kind of details on where people can find out more about your organization, maybe connect with yourself, anything else? And I'll put those in the speaker notes as well.
Sure, I really LinkedIn. If you message me on LinkedIn, that's the easiest way. If you go onto the Marquis website, you can fill out a form there that'll get passed around the organization. But the easiest way is really to just look me up on LinkedIn.
Cool. Well, I'll add those links in for anyone watching or listening. And yeah, thanks a lot. Really enjoyed this. I think we could spend a couple of hours digging into specifics, I realize, around biofuels, which is interesting, and maybe maybe there'll be a time to do that later. But look, thanks for joining. It's been great to chat. I appreciate you giving your time.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate this time.
Cheers.